Welcome to Full On Insanity with Nicola Matt. I'm your host, Nicola Matthews. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. In tonight's interview, I'm chatting with sci-fi author Neil Herndon. Thank you again, everyone, for joining me, and let's get to it. Thanks again for joining me. If you don't mind, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and about your work.
Let's see. What all would you like to know?
Everything.
Let's see. My name is Neil Herndon. I have a bachelor's degree in film with an emphasis in writing. I'm currently working on my master's degree in creative writing. I'm originally from the Midwest, and to date I have 9 published novels.
Awesome. So how did you become a writer? What drove you to first put pen to paper, so to speak?
I would say early on, I actually got started writing very early with a program called the Illinois Young Authors Conference. And that really started, it was, I think, originally done in elementary school, but it carried all the way up until 6th or 7th grade. And won that several times, was able to go to the local county conference, and then was able to go to the state conference a couple of times. And, you know, other than that, I've always really been a very imaginative person. As a child, I was, you know, always using my imagination, and the two always just kind of seemed to come together. So it seemed once I got a little older, you know, past high school, I did a lot of writing in college, and it really just kind of was the natural flow of things where it almost seemed like, well, why haven't I been doing this all along?
Right. So you started like in elementary school then, you know, fairly young, 2nd, 3rd,
Yeah.
4th grade?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So who was your favorite author when you were a child, when you were growing up? What was the first book you remember reading?
When I was young, I would probably have to say R.L. Stein. I took in those Goosebumps books like nobody's business. I mean, I must have read, I don't even know how many there were, 20, 30, and I would just read them all. Moved up into some larger books, but those are the first ones that really kind of stuck with me. I was always reading those. And then, you know, once I get a little older, moved into some of the classics, some of the more contemporary classics. A lot of, like, Stephen King has stuck with me. I still have a big collection of that, but, you know, I also really got into, like, the great classics, H.G. Wells and Jules Verne. So I've always had a really, my parents will tell you, I've always had a really, you know, drive to read, and now I actually enjoy creating just as much.
Absolutely. Now, for me, in elementary school, it was the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. But what drove me to writing was a love affair with Dr. Seuss, oddly enough.
Well, there you go. That's always a good one. I had a bunch of those as well.
My kids always loved them.
Oh, sure. I love the story behind Green Eggs and Ham, that it was actually a challenge by one of Seuss's friends to see if he could write a story with as few words as possible.
Awesome. Now, I have read that book so many times to my children. At one point, I could recite like the first 4 or 5 pages of it.
Oh, sure.
I love that book. So you're a sci-fi writer. How much research actually goes into writing science fiction novels?
I would say a lot. It depends really on the subject, but whether it's modern day, whether it's futuristic, you know, a lot of research goes into a lot of my projects. And that's something that's always fun, because if it's modern day, you get to learn about something you may not know. If it's a little more futuristic, that becomes interesting because then you have to get into some of the more, science fact and kind of base what you do off of there. So it becomes a little bit more of postulation. You're kind of theorizing. And in a way, science fiction writers kind of become scientists themselves because they have to have a basis in something if they're going to come up with, whatever new theory or whatever new device. You have to know something to be able to make it sound plausible, because you can't just have certain things happen. You see that in movies a lot, where you're starting to see certain movies have a lot more science fact in them than science fiction, and that always really helps, because then not only is it believable for the audience, it's a lot harder for people to say, well, that can't happen, that's not real. If you can give the audience something where it makes sense to them, where they can latch on to, then it's a lot easier for them to really get engrossed in your story, and then it makes a lot more sense where, something, whether it's aliens, whether it's some theory about the multiverse, whether it's cloning, it becomes a natural flow for them. They can see that basis in the real world, that groundwork, and then they can work off from there, because it's literature, the same as Hollywood, always has the one big rule. If you can get your audience to believe the one big lie, you've got them. And whatever that science part is, if you can get something that is believable for them, you've got them for the ride.
Absolutely. You've got to have some plausibility in there to grab them and hold in. I cannot stand to go watch to a movie and I'm sitting there going, yeah, that's not going to happen.
Yes.
One of the series that I have out, it's supernatural, but I try to scientifically explain vampires and werewolves, which has only kind of been touched in with Underworld. But I spent tons of time researching how the body fights diseases, evolution. I spent a lot of research, so trying to make this plausible. So it's definitely, you've got to be able to draw your audience in and keep their attention, and not them sitting there going, there's no way that's going to happen. You lose them very quickly when that happens.
It's so interesting you say that. I actually have a vampire book myself where I do the very same thing, where I talk about, there's certain diseases where the actual disease that makes you allergic to light, blood diseases where you constantly need transfusions. When you look at certain things where if all of these things are together, my postulation in the book is when they all come together, it's kind of a different species, kind of Neanderthal, Homo sapien, very, very close cousins. But being able to say, well, look at this real thing, and it makes a lot more sense, and me being able to say, well, of course, a stake to the heart will kill them. That'll kill anything.
Exactly.
And garlic allergies are real, metal allergies are real, sunlight allergies. So if you can put all these things together, it makes it so much more understandable. And with my story, this happens to a 16-year-old girl. Now imagine being a 16-year-old girl, which was, a little harder for me since I'm not a girl and I'm no longer 16. But imagine having to go through high school and dealing with all the, pitfalls of that, but also having all of this happen to you. And at first you don't understand what it is. It's just this horrible thing happened to me. I've got to go through and deal with, not only do I have to deal with the mean girls, the cliques, all of the back talk and all that stuff, now I'm allergic to sunlight. Now I can't participate in sports. Now I can't do, there's all these things. It's like, I can't be around this. I can't do that. Those kind of trials and tribulations, I think, also make it much more humanizing to the audience to be able to latch onto, something that they can understand and relate to. But like you, I love that idea of being able to throw something in and explain it. I love the idea of scientifically explaining something, looking at some aspect of something and saying, well, what if it works this way? What if this is the case? That is always fun for me as an author, and I frankly hope that it's fun for readers to be able to look at something in a new light. That's a way that I love to take books, is to take a topic we all know and go, well, what about this? maybe this is the case. What about this? Well, what if this is the explanation? Well, what if this is how it works? That is where, to me, writing becomes really interesting and really fun. And, it's something where, by the same token, I always say, as a reader, I want something that is engrossing like that. So I love the kind of story that draws me in, and I hope that my work does that for readers as well, because you want them to have that kind of experience where it's like, oh, I never thought of that. I never looked at that. Oh, this is so much, taking that kind of thing and really pushing it to a point where, people see it, they understand it, and they want to have more of it. That to me is what makes a great author and a great story. It's what I love to tell.
Absolutely. Now, I was the type of person, I like learning how all of it started and how all of it fits together. And I guess it's, being a writer, I enjoy, making it and piecing it all together and kind of making it come full circle. But, I love the Resident Evil movies. But I was the type of person that, you start after this outbreak happens, and they never explained what it was or what happened. And it's the same way with The Walking Dead. I'm like, okay, it's great and everything, but somebody back up and go tell me how all of this started. How does this fit in?
Sure,
I want the backstory.
And, that is always, to me, that is always a really major balance point, is how much of that backstory do you offer? The first video game, Biohazard, a.k.a. Resident Evil in America, never really went into that. Obviously, the movie did, and I liked that part, but you ask yourself, how much do you really need? How much does the audience really need? And that's where you enter that really kind of tricky, gray area for an author or creator is, what do you need? How much do they need? And sometimes there can be way too much showing, way too much backstory, way too much exposition. And sometimes, you need that to be able to understand fully. And it's really, what do we need as an audience to understand? What do we need to take that journey? And, it's, once you can figure that out, then it's a lot easier to deal with. It's just finding that balance, finding that perfect ratio is really tough a lot of times, because you want to tell so much, you want to explain so much, especially with science fiction, because it's a world that people aren't in, don't know, and probably won't experience in their lifetimes if it's something that involves space travel. How much do you really tell? How much do you really give them? What do we need to know? The nice thing in video games, you can get, maybe one screen with exposition. You have Mass Effect where they tell, if this year we found this and everything changed. You don't really need anything else. There's obviously backstory enough to create novels and comic books and other games and things, but that is really the challenge a lot of times, not just for science fiction, but all authors, is how much of that does the audience need to stay on that ride? How much do they need to buy that lie? And that is the other really difficult job an author has, on top of the research that we have to do in order to find what we want to give people. Because authors will always have, at least as far as I know, authors will always have some form of story Bible that contains everything they ever needed to know. And with that, you've got all those little things. You've got all those facts and figures and, well, this is how this works and this is how that is. And they may never show up in a book. But the thing is, and you get to decide how much goes in. You get to decide how much the audience needs. And then maybe later, if it's very popular, there's art books out, and you can get that you can get the design phase, you can get the fact stuff, or they come out later. We see that with J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter books, is she has told us facts, afterwards, where it's like, oh, wow, I never knew that. And that's where you also get that really interesting phase. So that stuff can come out later, and then people go back and read the book and see it in a whole new light.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it when that happens. I like putting little plays on words. There's a lot of my titles that people don't quite grasp but they're like little inside jokes, and most people don't get them until I tell them, and then they're like, oh, okay, I get it now. And
Sure.
I love doing that as an author, and as a reader, I love it even more when I find those little breadcrumbs and are able to connect the dots.
Mm-hmm. The only downside to me is, and I've talked about this with a few other people, is when you get those moments where that information is a little too hidden, and then it's like, the downside is, as an audience, how would you have ever guessed that? A good example is werewolves in the Harry Potter universe is an allegory for the AIDS issue. And if J.K. never tells you that, how are you going to guess that from the books? And that's when things like happen, that's my only ever issue when it is, because it's like, well, how am I ever supposed to get that knowledge unless you tell me? How am I supposed to? Because I don't think there's many people who looked at it and go, oh, yeah, that's the case. I totally get it. I love that it's buried. I love that it's subtle. But, that's one of those things where it's like, you really have to be looking and paying attention to get it without somebody telling you. That's not to say somebody can't get it. That's not to say somebody can't understand and can't say, oh, my God, is this? And then have it confirmed by the author, because that happens too. That's just as common. But, again, it goes back to that fine line of how much do you provide and how much do you offer later, and have people go back and reread something so they can fully understand it.
Exactly. Given that this is fiction, is any of it based on real people, places, or events of your life?
Well, as an author, you always put something of your life in there, whether it's yourself, whether it's names of people you know. I mean, I know that's a cop-out, because I think every author puts something of themselves in a book. And I think they often will use people they know as inspiration for characters. But a lot of it really comes down to, there's certain things I don't have experience in, and I like writing about that and learning about that and figuring that out. But, there's always a little bit that will show up. There's always a little bit of something that is in there, because, if that makes it relatable to then the author. Because if we have something that we see, and it's not just, for the audience and what did they see, then we as authors then get pulled in ourselves. And that leads to us taking the journey right along with the characters, because for me, the characters always tell the story much better than I could. And if I'm on that journey with them and there's something that I can relate to, that makes it much easier for me to take that journey. So I do put, a little bit from my life. I do put some aspects, not everything, but there's always going to be something in there that reminds me of me, or some aspect of my life, I should say.
Right. So are you a plotter or a pantser when you write?
How would you describe those two?
Are you someone that sits down and outlines everything before you start writing, or do you just sit down and just let the story take over and just write whatever comes to mind?
I am a little column A and a little column B. I like to plot out a little bit, get a very bare bones look at the story, and because you need to have some idea of where it's going to go. You have to have some list of landmarks that the story is going to follow. But those landmarks don't have to be permanent in my mind. That's kind of where I deviate. But what I love to do is, and this is something that I've talked about. I try to, hopefully this advice helps people. But if you can create good enough characters and decent enough landmark points, the story should eventually tell itself. And like I said, they know it better than me. It's just a matter of, can I create a character that is real enough and full enough that feels, lifelike on the page for them to react in a very realistic way. And once that happens, then it's just a matter of watching them play it out, because, once you get it going, once the machine starts, it's self-propelling. And that's the lovely part. And maybe one of those plot points that I sat down and did in my outline now doesn't make sense because, well, that wouldn't happen or that character wouldn't go there. This is unnecessary now. Maybe it goes in another direction because the characters themselves, the story itself, takes it in another direction. Maybe this isn't necessary. Maybe there's something else that goes here. And if you can create that living being, that biomechanical machine, and once you get it to a point where it's moving on its own, it almost takes over. And those are the days where I find myself writing the fastest, is when I have to put it in myself, it's a little slower, but once the machine gets up and running, the story really moves. And I think those are the days and those are the pages where, you really get invested, you really get involved from a reader standpoint, at least I hope. But, that's, to me, it always is good to have some idea of where you want the story to go, what you want the story to say and tell, and the journey and adventure you want the characters to go on. But that doesn't have to be set in stone. And that's where, to me, it becomes very interesting, because if it's not, then the story can transform it organically, and then you get something that's more believable, more interesting, and engrosses the audience all the more.
Definitely. I really prefer it when everything just starts flowing, and it's like I have to get it all out. On the days when I'm kind of having to force it, I've learned the hard way not to try to force myself. If I don't feel like writing and I'm not feeling the story, then I do something else. But on the days when it's just flowing and you just do not want to stop, those are the best writing days, and those are usually some of the best creations that I come up with. It's when the characters kind of take over and just do their own thing.
Absolutely. Well, and, a very good friend of mine gave me some great advice that he got, and that's do your best to at least try to write 5 pages a day. Sit down and do those 5 pages, and they may be forced, and you can change that, but if you can at least get out something, you've got a place to work from. If you go back and change it, fine. If you don't, hey, great, you got it out. But, something to get it out there, and maybe if you get something on the page, that will spark something new. If you're not all that inspired, if the story isn't quite clicking for you on that day, if you just get something out, maybe it will. Maybe you come back and read it, and you go, hey, well, what about this? And that inspires you to get the story kicking all the more. And I know it's hard. I have those days where, I struggle to get it out. But as long as you can get something, that kickstart does help. It does get things going. And that's where it becomes fun as an author, because as long as you can get something, you've at least got a jumping off point.
Yes. When I'm actively writing a novel, I usually try to do at least 1,000 words a day.
Sure.
And some days, I'm struggling to get 500 and I just cannot get them out. And then there's some days that I will, end up doing 5,000 or 6,000.
Sure.
But I like those days the best.
Oh, absolutely. But as long as you have yourself a goal and you can at least reach that, that's all that matters. That's the biggest thing. And that's how I really want to look at it. If you set yourself up a mark and you say, I'm shooting for 1,000, if I hit 500, okay, but I'm shooting for 1,000, and then you overshoot, that's great. That's even better. But having yourself a goal as an author is always the best plan. Because you may not have time. You may have to roll back. Not everybody has time to sit down and get 1,000 words out, and that's possible. But if you can set yourself a goal as an author to create, then maybe, your schedule opens up a little bit because you just can't stop. And you're right, as an author, those are the best days where if you stop, you'll lose something, and you're so excited to get it out, you've just got to stay and keep typing.
Yes,
those are the best days.
Exactly. What has been your favorite book to write so far, and why?
Ooh, that is really interesting. I would have to. See, that's a tough one.
Are you like me, and it depends? You've got certain series that you really love for different reasons, and it kind of like trying to choose your favorite kid. I really don't know. That's like someone asked me, well, which one's been your favorite character? Ooh, I like them all for various reasons.
I think it really depends. It's very hard. I'm one of those people who I can't choose just one movie. I'm like, well, give me all the genres. Give me my favorite in action. Give me my favorite. Because it's like you can't just pick one. And as an author, I don't think you can pick one either. I think, there's certain things historically I love. There's certain things, from a young adult standpoint that I love. My first novel was a retelling of the Peter Pan story. And that was interesting because the main character is, in fact, Captain Hook as a good guy. Going back to that, I love to look at things from a different point of view. That was fun. That was really interesting to write. And being able to research, real pirate stuff and real cities, and it was just a blast. But Sweet 16 was good, too. I have a book called 13 Club about a real club called the 13 Club that's historically based, and that's a murder mystery, and that was a blast. There's just so many books and so many ideas that I have that are all really interesting in their own right. One called Red Scare, and that's what if the Russians beat us to Mars and those Martians came back. It's an alien invasion story, but with a twist. There's all different ideas that from whatever point of view, from whatever aspect you want to look at, I enjoyed writing them all. As an author, I don't want to say, well, I just stick to this. I just like this one. This was because my argument becomes, well, if I didn't like it as much, why did I write it? Why did I sit down and retell the Jack the Ripper story with Jack the Ripper being a good guy? If that didn't intrigue me, why would I go down that road? Because, and I know I get in trouble for saying this, but why would I want to waste my time with something that I don't find intriguing, even if the audience doesn't necessarily buy it? Because, with the Jack the Ripper story, it's hard for people to see Jack the Ripper as the good guy. And I get that, and that's fine. But I love the idea of what if he was? What if he was doing something to save England? And we don't know. I love taking a story from a point of view of just a little different. What if aliens did come, but they were human? That's crazy. What if there's a space station that's a prison for kids? There's all these different ideas, and they all have different reasons why I love them. They all have different reasons why I loved writing them when I sat down. And it's I know it sounds a little cliche, but they all have a piece of my heart, and I can't say one piece is bigger or more important than the other. I love them all because I love sitting down and writing them all.
Absolutely. So let's talk publishing. Are you
Okay.
indie published or traditionally published?
I'm indie published. In fact, I'm self-published.
Awesome. So have you tried getting trade published, or did you just completely say, nope, that's not the route I want to go at all, and just dive into the self-publishing?
I tried a number of times, but, the market is so competitive that I just said, you know what, let's try this. And as much as I sent out, however many submissions and all of them got rejected, I said, you know what, I can actually publish this myself. And I looked at the numbers, I looked at the process, and it's so much easier to self-publish. And I actually get more money back in royalties than I would going at another route, which is great. I mean, I get control of my work. I get more money on the back end. That is a relationship that I love. I have to do more work, but, at least I have that control, and that's fairly important.
Yes, absolutely. I'm one of those people that I want complete control. I was traditionally published at one time, and my publisher went under, which thankfully they only had one book. But as soon as I signed the contract and started getting into the way everything worked, my entire gut was screaming, no, this is not what I want to do. And even though they were, begging me, we want all of your manuscripts, I'm like, no, we're going to see how you do with this one. And we'll see how that goes. And if you can prove to me that you're worth having the rest of my manuscripts, then I'll pull them. And, of course,
Sure.
I think I was with them for a year before they went under. And they were still actively taking on new authors, something like up 2 weeks before they decided they were going to close the doors.
See, and that's where you get tricky. And, I've seen stories on Facebook of there was a company that was actually closing its doors and wanted to pay authors with outstanding royalty checks 10 cents on the dollar. And as an author, that's reprehensible. That is just, like, there's no way. That's not going to work. If I spent time and money and effort doing this, and you owe me, and we're contractually obligated, no, I'm not going to not sue you. No, that's just not cool.
Yeah,
of course, by the
same slap in the face.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And that's where it gets really rough, and that's where you have to make that really hard decision. Do I do it myself? Do I go through a company? Of course, the irony being is that I've actually thought about starting a company and doing that. But since I know, I have the personal experience of going through that kind of indie market, I want to say that I would have a better idea of, what to do, what to tell people, being very upfront with them. So it really kind of runs that double-edged sword, because it's like, well, I could do this and I could help other people do it. But then do I become one of those people who's going to be like, well, we're going to close and I only want to give you 10 cents for every dollar you're owed. Are you cool with that? I don't want to. It really has to be. That's been something on my mind, but I don't want to fall into that trap. I don't want to be so exclusive that it's hard for people, because that's the great thing about self-publishing in this day and age, is it's so much easier for people to get their work out there. They have to do more work, but it's so much easier. And the downside to that is anybody can get their work out there. So there creates this very large field of sometimes work that isn't the greatest. And I've read a few books out there that are self-published, and they aren't the best. But they're self-published. The reviews are like, the spelling and grammar, and this is horrible. And it's like, but they put it out, they did the work, they got themselves into the market. That's at least something that you can respect. But, the nice thing about a traditional publisher is they have that editorial backing. They have the ability to kind of weed out the books that maybe need a little bit more time, maybe need a little more editing. And I would love to think that if I got into it, and this may be down the road, I don't know at what point, but if I got into it, I'd be able to look at it and have that same mindset of, indie, but not, publisher, but I've done it myself, so I know. And I don't want to lose that, because I love being able to control my work. I love being able to set price and all of that. But at the same time, I'd love to help others get out. I just don't want them to fill the market with books that need more editing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually started, when I first started self-publishing about 10, 11 years ago, I actually created my own publishing company just to publish my own stuff. And, of course, I have a co-author whose stuff
Sure.
that, the stuff that we do together is published under my house name. And I thought the same thing. I've been doing this for many, many years. I actually first started trying to get traditionally published when I was still in high school, when I was 14, 15 years old. So
kudos to you.
Well, thank you. But, I spent years and years and years, like all through high school and part of college, sending out, learning about query letters and agents and sending out manuscripts and, learning the trade publishing company from the ground up. So when I decided to do self-publishing, I didn't go into it, half blind. I know it is so easy. Literally anyone that can figure out how to open up an author account and hit upload on a file is suddenly an author, but there's so much more to it than that. And
Yes.
I went, I actually spent 2 years. Of course, that, in 2004 and 2005, Amazon wasn't offering self-publishing. You only had a few print-on-demand companies that were strictly print books.
Sure.
And you had, and of course, doing a print book is a whole different affair than doing an ebook. And
Oh my, yes.
there was, you had formatting rules and regulations. Everything was actually checked. There was actual quality control in place that if you did not have everything, all your ducks in a row, your book wasn't going to be published. So I had to learn how to do all the formatting. And of course, I freelanced as an editor ever since I was in high school. Some people mowed yards, babysat. I did book reports and term papers and everything. So, I've been doing it for years. So I sat down and spent 2 years researching and learning how to do everything with the publishing industry before I first hit publish on a book. And I was like you, I know it, and I've been doing it for so long. I've wanted to help others, but like you said, the market, there's so many people that need help, and you still need money that you're either having to do the editing yourself and the graphic artwork yourself, or you're having to pay somebody to do that. And I know just from my experience that, you're looking at several hundred to several $1,000s to produce a single book. And the fact of the matter is most of your self-published books aren't going to sell more than a few hundred copies, all told, if you're lucky. So it's no wonder everybody is going under, because they're taking on all of these manuscripts, thinking that the more authors and the more manuscripts they have, the more money that they're going to be able to make, but they're just not seeing a return on their investment. And I was the same way. I didn't want to fall into that trap of, having several authors under me and not being able to pay them, because, I've went in debt $3,000 trying to get their books out, and I've seen $300. And I'm sorry, I can't pay you because, I haven't made anything off of you. But it's still, a royalty is a royalty, and I still consider it a slap in the face if they weren't getting paid anything. And
that's where if you get into the game as a publishing company, if you set up those kind of rules where it's like, look, you'll get this royalty. There was one company I looked at that actually said, we're going to start you off as an ebook, and then if you do well, we'll move you up to a print book. And that made a ton of sense to me, because it's like, well, if you can sell enough to warrant the cost, that's great. And the thing of it is, I had a point, I just lost it. But, that's the thing. If you're going to do it where you're worried about those kind of costs, then if you can set up a system where it's got that check and balance of, well, we're not going to print you, we're going to do an ebook, which in this market is just as good. But we're going to start you there, and then we're going to move you to print once you sell past a certain thing. That makes so much sense. It makes so much sense, because then you know that the book is worth what it costs to actually put it out. And, the downside of worrying about, well, I've got to do this again, if they're earning royalties, they're earning royalties. If they're not, you can flat out tell them. And it's like, look, your book is not selling. I can only do so much. And when you self-publish, you have to look in the mirror and say that same thing. And that gets hard. Because it's like, well, I wanted to do this. No, you've got to. If you're not selling, it's on you. It's on me when my books don't sell. I have to get out there and tell people. I have to, set up whatever runs for that Amazon lets me do. I have to do something if they're not selling, if I want them to. There's sometimes where it's just like, well, let me get this book out and I'll worry about sales later. And, hey, that's fine too. But if you don't, it falls at your feet, not the publisher's, because you are the publisher.
Right.
And with the bigger people, you're right. That's them taking on that debt is a big thing, and I think that's a big portion of why they're so selective, and it does make sense. I just wish the market was a little better for that, because it's like, well, I can just self-publish this. Okay, go ahead. And then you have to do everything. But, it really runs that kind of, well, what route do you want to take? And it's very difficult. But, oh, that's what I was going to say. The great thing about you taking that time is you learned what is needed. And I probably, it's great that you spent 2 years learning all the ins and outs. It would be nice if there was a way for people to get that quicker. And the nice thing is, with the Amazon system, with the Kindle Direct, you kind of get that, but you still need somebody there. And what's great is, they don't publish you if it's not right, so you have to figure it out. You have to go through those trials and tribulations. And maybe that's what the new market is missing. Maybe that's why there was such an influx, and now it's kind of leveling off, because people aren't getting that real structure. They're not getting that your book needs to look like this, your book needs to have this. They're not getting those kind of lessons. They're just putting their book out there.
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of think that self-publishing has kind of done authors a disservice because, again, there's zero quality control on Amazon.
Yeah.
Even with CreateSpace, there's still pretty much no quality control at all. So people have not learned, how to do things properly. When I was in a lot of people ask me, why did you keep sending inquiry letters and manuscripts when you were getting, rejection letters left and right? And back when I was doing this, your rejection letters came with some scathing observations by editors.
Mm-hmm.
And they had no qualms about telling you just how bad it was and what you needed to work on. And one of the reasons why I kept submitting is because I was getting free advice. Of course, you don't get that now. They just tell you no and, don't have to tell you. But, 30 years ago, I was getting feedback. And, talk about having a new one ripped.
I was going to say how lucky you are. I never get feedback whenever I submit. So, but you're right, now they don't have to. And that's the thing.
Now they don't at all. And I really think that it's done authors a great injustice because you don't have an actual editor telling them this is what you need to focus on. These are your strengths. These are your weaknesses. This is what you need to improve on.
And that's the fine line that self-publishing has created. It's a very fine line because it's like, this is great. It's an open door that allows people to get their work out and show the world, and that's fantastic. But at the same time, it's an open door. And if it's just open for anybody, it's open, if it's open for everybody, it's open for anybody. And that's the thing. There is no control. There is no editorial. There is no one checking. And, there have been whole sections of Amazon that have had to be shut down because people were filling it with stuff that really probably shouldn't have been written in the first place. And as much as I'm like, oh, but authors, no, there are certain things that shouldn't be written, and that's fine. In school, I have given people or said to people, know your market, know your audience. If you don't do those things, and people have disagreed with me, and that's fine, they don't have to, but if you want to sell, if you want to be in the market, who are you selling to? Who is going to buy this? Will somebody do that? And you really have to be conscious of that. And if you look at it and go, well, I don't know, that's a problem. An editor might tell you that. You might be able to learn, well, this is the audience for that. They might be able to hone in. Jules Verne had a great idea. The work that Jules Verne put out is only the way it is because of his editor. And people question, I like getting notes personally. I love it because I know it makes my work better. I love to get notes. I love to have people read it. And I love to be able to say, shoot holes, as many as possible. Find them. Because if they do that, and it's not published yet, then I know when I do publish that it won't be flawless, but it will be far less flawed. And that will help the audience go along with it. That's what you're looking for as much as possible. And without it, you have to have somebody at least telling you, maybe you should focus on a different aspect. Maybe you should go a different route. If they're not going to story edit, maybe they should do an overall edit. Where is this going to go? Who is going to buy this? How many people are in that market? If you're doing a story that appeals to 200 people, how many of those 200 people are actually going to buy your book? If you're going to do a YA book, a young adult, how big is the young adult market? What percentage of that market is likely to buy your stuff? You know, if you look at it and go, well, maybe 1% of whatever market will buy this work. I know that's small, or maybe it's too big, but if you look at it and figure anywhere less than 10%, maybe even less than 5%, will be willing to buy your work. What is that number? How many people does that equate to? Can you get that number higher? How can you do that? Because if you start with, like I said, the 200, what is 1% of that? 2 people? Or less? I mean, is that worth the time of you working on it? Is that, or should you figure out a way to make your audience bigger so that it's more well received, has a wider audience, and can get to more people? Because if it's only available to certain people, they're not going to tell their friends. If it's, oh, you're not into that. You wouldn't like this. You know, you don't want that. You want as many people as possible buying your work. And sure, not every story is going to appeal to everybody. Not every science fiction story appeals to some people. I went to undergrad with a girl who didn't like science fiction. That's fine for her. That's fine. But you want your work to appeal to as many people as possible. You want it to be accepted by as many people as possible. And at least some publishers will, if you go traditional, they do that. They figure that out. That's what their screening process is for. You have to do that yourself when you self-publish. And that's so hard to look in the mirror and say, who is going to buy this? Who wants this? Does anybody? Does somebody? It's so heartbreaking if you have to say, I don't know, or not many. Because then you have to really decide, what are you doing with this? And that's, you know, I find myself doing that before every project. Is this something I would read? Is this something my family would read? My friends? You know, what are people going to do with it? Because if it doesn't appeal to people you know, and that's just the start, how are you going to get it to people you don't know?
Exactly.
Somebody's got to like it. Somebody has to like it. And you're right, that is the biggest downside to self-publishing is there is no one there having you ask this question. You have to ask it yourself. And so many people out there want to just go, everyone will love it. I want to publish my book. They'll all love it. Really? Is that really the case? What genre is it? How many of those books sell? How big of an audience is it? What percentage is likely to buy a new author? And nobody wants to have that conversation with themselves. Nobody does. And I get it. I do. It's the hardest conversation you have to be able to go, yeah, 3 people will probably buy this. Should I write it?
Yep.
And I don't want to sound elitist, but the answer.
I said that pretty much sounds me, and that's about how many people I have buy them.
Well, you know what? At least, but you're still doing it. So whether they buy it or not, you're still going. You're still putting them out, and that's, as an author, to me, that's the important part. Whether they buy it or not, you're not saying, well, no one's buying, I'm done. Because you don't want to take that route either. You don't want all the dozens or hundreds of "we're sorry, not this time" letters to put you off. You want those letters, because those letters, even if they just say, no, thank you, not at this time, you know there's something that needs work.
Right.
And that is at least a place to start. And then you can go, well, what is it? And I know the downside there is now you're hunting for that one light bulb on the Christmas tree that's out among 200. But hey, at least you've got a place to start. Okay. And I also look at it this way. I was looking up numbers one time, and this is something that I'm at least shooting for, and I know it'll be a long time before I hit this. The odds of having a New York Times bestseller are 1 in 220. 220. That's all you got to do. course, now if you can write 220 novels, you're probably already selling pretty well. But hey, at least it's not winning the lottery. But looking at it that way, 1 in 220 people have New York Times bestsellers. That's something. And if you can figure out where to go, that's something more.
Absolutely. What's been the hardest part about being a writer for you?
Hardest part. I would say somewhere between the focus, the research. I mean, being able to sit down and just write, being able to really pour my heart into it and really get an idea. I mean, once it starts, but finding not really just the motivation, but really the inspiration for any new story, because at some point you're going to get stuck. At some point, I think we all do. I know I do. There's points where I just can't see it anymore. And I don't want to be, in only this sense, I don't want to be J.R.R. Tolkien, who, whenever he would come to a plot hole in Lord of the Rings or Hobbit, he would start over. He would literally scrap everything he's written and start over. I don't want to get to that point. I mean, I respect him tremendously for doing so. But it is so, I want to just keep writing. I want to keep going. And finding some days, if I don't have it, if I don't have the inspiration, if I don't have the next point, I think that becomes the hardest part for me, because there are certain things that you can just do, that you can just get out, and that's fine. But then there's other days where it just becomes hard. If you don't have certain points, it's a struggle. Because I don't want to say, coming up with new ideas. I love coming up with new ideas. I love asking a question and saying, well, what if? Well, what about? Hey, what if I did this? That is fantastic. And I don't want to say completing those ideas is the worst part either, because I love to write. I'm an author. I love to write. Oh, I know what the hardest part is. Coming up with sequels. That's the hardest part, because once I've written a story, my mind kind of goes, okay, that's it.
We're done.
What's next? But I don't want to just do one-off stories either. I don't want to do a one and done. This is the only book. I like creating a world, and I want to stay in it. I have a series that I'm currently working on that it's an open-ended series where it doesn't have to ever end. That I've created a world big enough that as long as I want to keep writing in it, I can. But getting to the point where it's like, you've got that new idea and you're not just, okay, what's next? Because as an author, at some point your brain gets tired. At some point it will be exhausted from telling a story, and that's why it's always good to come up with a new idea and have a new project ready to go. Because you can give your brain that break and say, okay, work on this for a while and we'll come back and do the sequel later.
Yeah.
And then later comes, and later gets here, and, well, what's next? Oh, we're still on this? Oh, really?
And this is why I have 6 manuscripts going at the same time. You have various series, various different notes. I get on one and I'm like, okay, I'm tired of dealing with that. And unfortunately, dealing with a series is kind of like opening up a can of worms. I mean, you start writing one and it's like you just have more and more ideas. You're like jotting down things. I'm like, next thing you know, this one book ends up being like 12 or 15 books long, and you haven't even finished writing book 2 yet, and you're already plotting book 15. That's the problem that I have. And then it's, when do I have time to work on this? And then in the meantime, I've had 4 or 5 different new books and series to pop in my head. So for me, it's finding the time to be able to, organize everything and actually sit down and write it. And I have shiny thing syndrome. Every time I see something shiny, I'm off to a new project.
Don't we all? I think that is the bane of authors, because once you a project out, it's like, oh, that's a new idea. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's work on that one for a while. Never mind, I've got 8 books going right now. This sounds like a really cool idea. Let's start on it.
See, and that's where I have to set myself up at least an archive of ideas. If nothing else, I don't number them because maybe the mood doesn't strike me to write that idea today, but at least I have this list of possibilities. So if I come up with an idea while I'm working on something, write it down, put it in the archive, I will come back for you.
Absolutely. I have one of those folders myself, writing prompts. Yeah, what if we do this? What if we do this? Oh, you remember that one little character that had like a 1 sentence 4 books back? Yeah, I've got this whole idea on his backstory now. Let's go and write him a book now.
Hey, sometimes those can actually turn out really well. You never know. But I think I would be remiss if every author didn't have one of those folders, because I don't think we can ever turn off. I don't think a writer's brain ever shuts off from creating, because you never know what's going to spark it. I think all artists are like that, whether it's a painter, a photographer, any type of artist, musician. I think at some point we always have something that sparks us, and we always have to have that folder of what we're doing next, even if that folder will take us 3 solid years or more to complete. Hey, at least, we've got a list ready to go.
Exactly.
What do you want to do today? Well, let me go through.
Yeah, book roulette today. I have some authors that, they'll say, well, I'm scared of running out of ideas. I'm like, I'm scared of running out of time and dying before I write everything down that I want to write about. How are you running out of ideas?
I don't think I will ever be scared of running out of ideas. If I start running out of stuff, there's something wrong. Because those are the people who I'm like, how many ideas do you have now? And you're running out?
You definitely.
How many did you start with?
Yeah, for real. I think I would burn out quicker than I would run out of stuff to write about.
Yes, and I think that happens more often than not. And I would frankly rather that happen, where it's just like, you know what, I need a break. We're going to play video games today. We're going to binge watch Netflix before that. But I can't imagine running out of ideas, especially with my list the way it is. I just can't imagine running out of ideas and not being out in the world and suddenly coming up with a new one.
Definitely. I know someone, and I find inspiration in the silliest of things. Someone can say something to me, like a single sentence, and I will have formed an entire book and an entire world around that single sentence.
Yeah.
So
or an image or a photo or a painting. Oh, all it takes is one.
Exactly.
All it takes is one.
So apart from writing, what else do you like to do? Do you have any hobbies or anything that you like to do to, whenever you're not writing, kind of take your mind off of your next storyline, or if you get writer's block?
Well, as a child of the 80s, I am still very into video games, even though I'm sure my parents would not enjoy that, although they know full well that at 35 I still play them. But I make no qualms about enjoying any of that. But whether it's video games, whether it's travel, just going out for a drive, I'm already a relaxed person, but I went to school for film, so watching movies and TV is always fun to do, and you can get ideas from that and go, you know what, I can do that better, which then that's no longer relaxing, so then it kind of ruins the point. But, I live in a really lovely area where you can take a great drive. There's not a ton of major sites, but there's a lot of great places to visit, a lot of great things that I can do in the meantime. But yeah, I've got some pretty, I won't say self-sufficient things that I enjoy doing, but sitting in front of the TV playing video games, that's always really fun, because that's always a great way to shut off. And you had a bad day, your characters aren't doing what you want. Hey, go kill some aliens. That's fine.
Now I'm usually right backwards. I've had a bad day at work. Some character's going to get it tonight. Someone's getting killed off. Something.
There you go. Hey, whatever we need to do to relieve tension is what I say. I mean, within reason. There's certain things that's just not acceptable. But hey, for me, digital world, there's no consequences digitally. It's not going to get me in trouble.
Exactly.
So video games is such an easy place. You know, I can hijack a car, and nobody's going to bother me because it's not a real car.
Definitely. If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't stop. Keep going. Don't lose, you know, because I think we all have points where it's like, okay, what should I really do? Where should I really go? And I looked at a lot of different things in my life, and there's a lot of things that I still can do, could do, will do, but I kind of wavered on writing. And I don't know if I want to say I should have stuck with it longer, but I was always so imaginative. I was always so in that place, and I wish I would have stayed, because there was a period where I know that I wasn't there, and I really wish I would have, because maybe I would have been further along. Maybe I would have, you know, matured faster as a writer if I would have, even if it was just in my spare time, just stayed with it and just kept going. And it could have been for me. It could have been, I have no problem saying, yeah, I could have just had a folder of mediocre or subpar work. That's fine. I still have some of my early books, and they're terrible. They are atrocious. But you know what? It's a starting point. And I wish I would have had a bigger folder. I wish I could have done more. I wish that some of that time that I spent not doing it, I could have been, or maybe played a few less video games and done a little more writing, you know. But just to stay with it, to since I found it so early on, since I enjoyed doing it early, don't ever give it up. And that's something that I would tell my younger self. I would tell anybody who finds a passion, keep it. Don't stop. Because you know what? You need that in your life. You need to have something that you enjoy. And it doesn't have to be your, you know, your job, your mode of salary. You don't have to earn a lot from it. You can just do it. And you know what? That can be a great release, if nothing else. If it's not who you are, it's not what you do, maybe it's where you go to relax. Maybe you tell a story. And that's fun for you because you can't do that in your real life. I don't know. You know, I can't tell everybody where they should be, but whatever you enjoy doing, do it. And I always enjoyed writing, and I should have stayed. It's not like I abandoned it, but if I would have, I always feel like with some of my early stuff, if I would have kept with it, if I would have stayed in longer, like I said, I could have matured a little bit faster and a little bit better. And some of the lessons that I had to learn later, I could have learned sooner. And that's also important, being able to learn those things and do those things for everybody, whether it's being an author, whether it's writing, whether it's art, or whether it's just life. There's lessons you need to learn. There's things you need to do. Don't be afraid of them.
Absolutely. Well, Neil, I want to thank you so much for joining me tonight and allowing me to interview. I have really enjoyed it. I hope my listeners are going to enjoy it as much as I have. But again, thank you so much. And if you ever want to do it again, I'd love to have you back on the show.
It was an absolute pleasure, and I would love to come back.
Thank you again, Neil, for joining us tonight. Everyone, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. Until next time, this is Nicola Matthews saying peace, love, and books, y'all.